Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be going through the congressional record.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, should be pretty fascinating. A lot going on, as always,
Yeah,
in Congress. So we're going to see what we can pull out of the record that might be interesting to our listeners.
yeah. This is always one of those things that people hear about, but I don't know if they actually ever, look at.
Right.
So we're going to give them some insights into what's actually in there.
Yeah, and kind of how the sausage gets made a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
What I found really interesting was, I was expecting it to be just kind of dry policy.
Yeah,
But there's actually a lot of, human interest stuff in there.
right.
Like, did you see the tribute to Dale Meyerheffer?
Oh, yeah.
Like he's this biological technician who saved all these hemlock trees.
Right. In Shenandoah National Park.
Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And just the representative's words were just so heartfelt.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes. Really highlighting, sort of the unsung heroes who
Mhm.
were really making a difference in the world.
Yeah. And it wasn't just him, There was Pastor Audrey King.
Yes.
And she founded this organization to help unhoused mothers and children.
Right. The Restoration Community Development Corporation.
Yes.
I think that's a really powerful example of how, policy has a direct impact
Yeah.
on people's lives.
Yeah. And these are just a couple examples. I mean, there's just so many.
Right.
But, speaking of impact, one of the things that's really front and center in the congressional record right now is the fentanyl crisis.
Oh, absolutely.
And there's a lot of talk about this HLT Fentanyl Act,
Yes.
which would permanently classify fentanyl analogs as Schedule I substances.
Right.
And that basically means they're deemed to have a high potential for abuse
Mm-hmm.
and no currently accepted medical use. So it's a pretty significant move, aimed at really trying to crack down.
Yeah. Trying to give law enforcement more teeth to really try to control the trafficking of this incredibly deadly substance.
Right.
But as with all things, there's arguments on both sides,
Right.
you know?
What are some of the concerns that people have?
Well, one concern is that, it's not really getting at the root of the problem.
Okay.
So just scheduling it is not necessarily going to stop people from wanting these drugs in the first place.
Right.
And also, it doesn't really address the lack of access to treatment
Okay.
and harm reduction services.
So it's more than just a supply side problem.
Exactly. It's a much more complex issue. And so some lawmakers and some advocacy groups are pushing for a much more holistic approach.
Okay.
Focusing on things like prevention, education, and really expanding access to those treatment and recovery programs.
Yeah.
But even then, there's challenges in securing funding for those.
Right. Because even though there was the Support for Patients and Communities Reauthorization Act.
Yes, which had broad bipartisan support, but still it can be a battle.
Yeah. To actually get the funding for these programs.
Yeah.
And I imagine in the current political climate, it's probably even tougher.
Well, and particularly with things like, the Trump administration enacting a funding freeze.
Yeah.
Things like that further complicate the situation.
Yeah. So, I think it's important for people to realize that even when there is a willingness to act,
Yeah.
sometimes the wheels of government move very slowly.
Right.
And it's not always a straight line from
Absolutely. It's a much more complex process.
idea to implementation.
Yeah.
But let's move on to another really important issue that's highlighted in the congressional record, and that's wildfire fighting technology.
Yes.
And specifically, this Emergency Wildfire Fighting Technology Act of 2025,
Yeah.
which calls for the evaluation of the Container Aerial Firefighting System, CAFFS.
CAFFS.
Right. So, this is basically a system that uses aircraft.
Right. To drop these containers filled with water or fire retardant, trying to increase the speed and efficiency of fighting these wildfires.
But there's been some concerns raised.
There was a study back in 2011 by the Forest Service
Right.
that raised concerns about its effectiveness.
Right.
And also about the potential safety risks
Right.
of using this system.
So it sounds like there's still a lot of debate
Absolutely.
about whether this is the right approach.
Right. And whether or not, there needs to be further evaluation
Yeah.
of the system.
Or maybe some technological advancements
Right. Yeah.
to make it safer and more effective.
Right.
But, speaking of how Congress works,
Right.
one of the cool things about the congressional record is you can actually see the sausage getting made.
Yeah. You get into those procedural details.
Right. Like, how resolutions are introduced, committee appointments.
Right. Roll call votes.
Yeah. You can see all that.
You can really see how individual members voted and how that shapes the outcome.
Yeah, kind of cool to see all laid out there.
Yeah.
But sometimes the congressional record throws you a curveball.
It does.
Like, did you see that the stuff about Elon Musk?
I did. That was an unexpected twist.
Right. Like, he's not just mentioned in passing.
No.
Like, he's involved in some serious legal and ethical concerns.
Yeah.
Like, what is going on there?
Well, it's a pretty serious situation. There's a lawsuit that's been filed against some of Musk's associates,
Right.
and they're accused of illegal data harvesting from the Office of Personnel Management.
Okay. So what does that mean?
Well, essentially, they're saying that they connected a server to a government network
Uh-huh.
without authorization,
Okay.
and then they harvested sensitive employee data.
Okay. Like, what kind of data?
Names, email addresses, possibly even more sensitive information.
Wow. So that raises a lot of red flags about data privacy and cybersecurity,
Absolutely.
especially since, it seems like they didn't even do a privacy impact assessment.
Right, which is supposed to be a requirement.
Aye.
So yeah, there's definitely a lot of concern about how this data could potentially be misused.
Right. Yeah, that's unsettling, to say the least. And then there's also this whole controversy about Musk's access to the Treasury's payment systems.
Yes, which is a whole other can of worms.
Right. Like, how did that even happen?
Well, it seems that his companies have gained access through various contracts and partnerships
Okay.
with
Yeah.
government agencies.
Okay. And I guess the concern is that this is a huge conflict of interest.
Absolutely.
Right. And that he might be using this access for his own personal gain.
Potentially. And that's something that lawmakers are definitely looking into.
Right. So it seems like we're in uncharted territory here.
We are.
Right.
We are. This is a new kind of situation.
Right. With these private individuals and the power that they wield.
Right. And especially, a billionaire like Musk,
Yeah.
with all the influence that he has, it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, for sure. But let's shift gears now and talk about another powerful figure whose actions are still having repercussions in Congress, and that's former President Trump.
Of course.
And specifically, I wanted to talk about that memo that came out of his Office of Personnel Management that was basically giving federal workers an ultimatum
Right.
to either quit their jobs
Voluntarily.
voluntarily
Right.
in exchange for keeping their pay and benefits for 8 months or risk potential job elimination.
Right. So it was essentially a forced choice.
Yeah. Talk about pressure. I mean, that must have created so much anxiety
Oh, absolutely.
among federal employees.
You have tens of thousands of workers, people who care for veterans, people protecting our ports, our airports,
Yeah?
ensuring food safety, all sorts of essential government functions.
Right. And suddenly they're being told,
Quit or else.
yeah, quit or else.
And that's going to be a really difficult position to be put in.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like it would just completely undermine morale.
It did. It created a lot of fear and uncertainty.
Right. And also, I would think it would make it harder to attract new talent
Exactly.
to government service.
It makes people question whether it's even worth it.
Right. And then on top of that, there are the pardons.
The pardons,
Yeah.
always controversial.
Right. I mean, pardoning individuals who were convicted of serious crimes.
Right. And those pardons sparked a lot of debate
Yeah.
about the proper use of presidential power
Right. Yeah.
and whether these actions really undermine justice.
Right. I mean, it seems like it sends a message that some people are above the law.
It can be interpreted that way.
Right. And that's definitely something that people are concerned about.
Right. And it's important to remember that those pardons are still having an impact.
Yeah. We're still talking about them.
Exactly. And the congressional record is a really valuable resource for understanding
Yeah.
the context of those decisions.
Yeah. And the debates that surrounded them.
Absolutely.
So we've seen the human side of Congress. We've delved into a pressing national crisis.
Yes.
And we've looked at the impact of powerful figures.
Right.
But now I want to zoom out a little bit and look at the broader policy landscape that's reflected in the congressional record.
Okay.
What are some of the big issues that are being debated?
Well, it's a wide range of topics.
Yeah.
Everything from nuclear power to disaster aid, the importance of school counselors,
Right.
foreign aid. It's really a microcosm of all the challenges facing our nation.
Yeah. And it's fascinating to see how these issues are being discussed and debated.
Absolutely.
So, for example, there's a lot of talk about nuclear power,
Yeah.
and whether it should play a larger role in the U.S. energy mix.
Right.
Currently, we have 93 commercial nuclear reactors,
Right.
generating about 20% of the nation's electricity.
which is significant,
Yeah.
but there are concerns
Right.
about the aging reactors,
Mhm.
the potential risks involved.
Right. And the whole issue of waste disposal.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
a big one.
That it's not an easy problem to solve.
No. So it's really a complex issue,
It is.
right?
Yeah.
With a lot of different factors to consider.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, there's the whole issue of disaster aid.
Yes.
Yeah.
Always a pressing concern.
Right. Especially with all the natural disasters that we've been seeing lately.
Especially in California.
Yeah, California.
It's been hit hard.
Yeah. And so, there's always a debate about how to allocate resources,
Right.
you know?
How much to give, where to send it.
Right. And how to prevent waste and fraud.
Always important considerations.
Yeah. So it's a challenging issue.
It is.
Yeah.
Trying to balance the immediate needs with long-term sustainability.
Right. And then there's the whole discussion about school counselors,
Oh, yeah.
which I think is so important.
Absolutely.
Their role in supporting students' mental health and career development is just crucial.
It is. They're often the first line of defense
Yeah.
for students who are struggling. Yeah. But they're so often under-resourced and overworked.
They are.
And so, I think there's a growing recognition that we need to do more to support them.
Yes. To give them the resources they need to really do their jobs effectively.
Yeah. And then finally, there's foreign aid.
Yes. Always a hot button issue.
Right.
Always.
And, the congressional record captures all the arguments for and against providing aid to specific countries.
Right. Like Tunisia, for example.
Tunisia was a big one.
Yes. There were a lot of questions raised about the political situation there and whether it was wise to continue providing aid.
Right. So it's a really complex issue,
It is.
balancing the needs of other nations with our own domestic priorities.
Right. And making sure that the aid is actually being used effectively.
Right. So it's a lot to think about.
It is.
But I think it's important for people to be aware of these discussions
Absolutely.
and to understand the different perspectives.
Because it ultimately impacts all of us.
Right. And the congressional record is a great resource for doing that.
It is. It's a window into the heart of our democracy.
Right. And it's accessible to everyone.
Exactly.
So if you're interested in learning more about how our government works and what issues are being debated,
I encourage you to check it out. Welcome back to our deep dive into the congressional record.
so, last time we were talking about Elon Musk
Oh, yeah.
and his involvement with government data and access to the Treasury's payment systems.
Right?
It all sounds very like cloak and dagger.
It is a very complex situation.
Yeah. Can you unpack that a little bit more for us?
So, the lawsuit against Musk's associates
Right.
for allegedly harvesting that sensitive data from the Office of Personnel Management,
Right.
that's really just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, wow.
Think about all the personal information about federal employees, their social security numbers, financial details, potentially even health records.
Yeah.
And all that accessed without their knowledge or consent,
Yeah. That's really scary.
it's a huge data breach.
Yeah. And then how did he even get access to the Treasury's payment systems?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
The details are still kind of murky,
Yeah.
but it seems like his companies have gained access through these various contracts and partnerships
Okay.
with government agencies.
Okay.
And while, some people argue that this is necessary for, certain transactions and efficiency,
Yeah.
others are saying this is a huge conflict of interest.
Yeah. It seems like a pretty big conflict of interest.
It is.
To me, at least.
It is. And they're saying that, he has undue influence over critical government functions.
It's like too much power in one person's hands.
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
We're entering this uncharted territory
Right.
where the lines between private enterprise and government power,
Yeah. They're getting blurry.
they're very blurry. And it's something we need to think about.
Yeah.
And, the congressional record is documenting all of this. The debates, anxieties, search for safeguards.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we talk about a democracy,
Right.
but, power can be concentrated
Absolutely.
in ways that we don't always anticipate.
Right.
And I think this is a good example of that.
It is.
So speaking of things that we don't always anticipate,
Yeah.
we were talking before about former President Trump
Yes.
and that ultimatum that he gave to federal workers
Right.
to quit or get fired. I mean, what happened? Did
For sure.
people actually quit?
Well, it's hard to say exactly what the impact was.
Right.
But, I talked to a lot of people,
Yeah.
and there was a lot of anxiety.
Yeah, I bet.
There was a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah.
You're a dedicated public servant.
Yeah.
You've committed your career to serving the country.
Right.
And then suddenly you're faced with this impossible choice.
Yeah. Like a lose-lose situation.
It is. It is.
And I imagine it wasn't just about, individual morale, but it probably had a ripple effect,
It did.
on the whole government.
It made it harder to attract talent.
Right.
It made it harder to retain the talent
Yeah.
that we already had.
And then people would say, see, government's inefficient.
Right. Exactly.
It doesn't work.
And they use that
Yeah.
as an excuse to further dismantle it.
Right, right.
And that's very concerning.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Okay, so we talked about nuclear power,
Yes.
disaster aid,
Mm,
school counselors, foreign aid.
right.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, but it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
And we can see these challenges playing out in real time
Yeah.
in the congressional record.
Okay, so let's start with nuclear power.
Okay.
It seems like that's back on the agenda
It is.
a big way.
It is.
People are talking about energy independence,
Right.
reducing carbon emissions,
Mm.
but what about safety?
Well, that's always the big question, right?
Right.
It's a powerful technology.
Yeah,
It has the potential to do a lot of good, but the risks are real,
right.
and we have to take them seriously.
And a lot of the plants are getting old.
They are. They are.
That's a huge issue.
How long can they last?
Right.
Before we have to either spend a ton of money to upgrade them.
Or decommission them,
Yeah, exactly.
which is a huge undertaking in itself.
Yeah.
It's not a simple problem.
No, it's not. Okay, so then there's disaster aid.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like every time we turn around, there's another hurricane,
The wildfire.
another earthquake,
Right.
and, we need to be prepared to help those communities
Absolutely
Well,
recover. But, as always, there's the question of funding.
Yeah. How much?
How much to allocate?
Where should it go?
Where should it go? How to prevent waste and fraud?
Right.
Those are all important considerations.
Yeah, and it's not always easy to make those decisions.
It's not, especially when you're dealing with a lot of different needs
Right.
and a lot of different pressures.
Yeah.
Political pressures as well.
It's a very complex situation.
Yeah. So it's like, even when we want to help,
Right.
it's not always clear what the best way to do that is.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where, you see the congressional record
Right.
really come alive.
Yeah.
You see those debates.
Right.
You see those different perspectives.
Right.
You see how those decisions are made.
Okay, I want to circle back to school counselors.
Yes, absolutely.
It's just amazing to me
It is.
how much they do.
They do so much.
For our kids,
They're really unsung heroes.
they are,
They are.
they're supporting their mental health.
Their well-being,
Yes.
their academic success.
In this world, that just seems to be getting more and more stressful,
Right.
more and more uncertain.
It's a tough time to be a kid.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
But so often, they're just stretched so thin.
They are. They are.
They have very limited resources
Me too.
and overwhelming caseloads.
Right. It's like trying to put out a forest fire with a garden hose.
Yeah, exactly.
They need more support.
Yeah.
They need more training.
We need more everything.
They do. They do.
Yeah.
And it's encouraging to see that, there are lawmakers on both sides of the aisle who
Yeah.
are recognizing this
Yeah.
and who are calling for increased investment.
It makes me feel like maybe there's hope.
There's always hope.
Yeah.
The congressional record, it often highlights our divisions,
Right.
but it also shows
Yeah.
those moments where we can come together,
Yeah.
where we can find common ground
Yeah.
and work towards solutions.
Okay, last but not least,
Mm-hmm.
foreign aid.
Yes. Always a tricky one.
It is.
Always.
We were talking about Tunisia
Right.
and the concerns about what's happening there.
Yes, the democratic backsliding,
Yeah.
the potential for misuse of funds.
Right, right.
And it's a difficult decision.
Yeah, because on the one hand, we want to help people.
We
We
do.
want to support democracy and human rights.
Absolutely.
But we also don't want to be, throwing money away
Right.
or propping up corrupt regimes.
Exactly. So it's about finding that balance,
Yeah.
finding that sweet spot.
And what I find so interesting about the congressional record
Mm-hmm.
is that you can actually see how lawmakers are
Right.
grappling with these issues.
Right. You can see the back and forth, the arguments, the compromises.
Right.
It's a real window into the process.
So it's like we're trying to help,
We are.
but we also have to be smart about it.
We do. We do.
And that's a tough line to walk.
It is a tough line to walk.
Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground here,
We have.
from, Elon Musk's power to the economy.
So the challenges of foreign aid?
But our deep dive into the congressional record isn't over yet.
Not yet.
we're going to continue exploring these issues.
Yes.
And look at some specific examples of how they're being addressed.
Right, the actual legislation.
Yeah, and what it all means for the future of our nation.
Join us next time for Part 3. Part 3.
All right, so welcome back to this final part of our deep dive into the congressional record.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
It has. It has. But, we've talked a lot about the big picture.
Right.
The big concept.
The challenges.
The challenges.
Facing our nation.
But now I kind of want to get down to, like, the brass tacks.
Yeah.
Like, how are these issues actually being addressed?
In legislation.
Yeah.
Right? How are these ideas actually being turned into laws?
Right, because it's one thing to talk about them,
Yeah.
but it's another thing to actually see how they're being implemented.
Exactly. And, that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
It's in those bills.
The amendment.
The votes.
Yeah.
We can really see how those concepts become concrete policy proposals.
So let's dive into some specific examples.
Okay.
We talked a lot about the fentanyl crisis
Yeah.
and the HLT Fentanyl Act.
Right.
So what's the latest on that? Has it actually moved forward?
Well, it's still making its way through the legislative process, but it's facing some whitles.
Okay.
It's a very controversial approach.
Right, because some people say we need tougher law enforcement.
Right.
And other people are saying, no, we need to focus on public health.
Exactly. And that's really the heart of the debate.
Yeah.
And you can see that playing out in the congressional record.
Okay.
You see those different perspectives. You see those arguments. You see the proposed amendments.
Yeah.
For example, Representative Smith, who's a big proponent of the HLT Fentanyl Act,
Right.
he gave a really powerful speech on the House floor, sharing these stories of families who've been devastated by fentanyl overdoses.
Oh, wow.
And urging his colleagues to pass the bill.
Right.
Without delay.
So he's appealing to their emotions.
He's trying to create that sense of urgency,
Right.
but he's also making a legal and philosophical argument,
Okay.
essentially saying that these synthetic opioids,
Right.
they're just too dangerous. They have
Yeah.
no place in our society,
Oh.
regardless of any potential medical benefits.
Okay, so then what about the other side?
Well, Representative Jones,
Okay.
who has a background in public health,
Right.
she gave a counter speech,
Okay.
really emphasizing the need for a more nuanced approach.
Okay.
She said, simply criminalizing these substances,
Yeah.
it's not going to solve the problem.
Right.
It could actually make it worse.
Okay.
Drive the drug trade further underground.
Right.
Make it harder for people with addiction to seek help.
Right.
So it's not just a battle of facts and figures.
It's a battle of ideas.
It is. It's a battle of narratives.
Okay, so let's move on to another issue.
Okay.
We talked about wildfire fighting technology,
Yes.
specifically the Container Aerial Firefighting System, CAFFS.
Right.
So what's happening with that?
Well, that Emergency Wildfire Fighting Technology Act of 2025,
Yeah.
which calls for the evaluation of CAFS,
Right.
it's moving along, but it's facing some pushback.
Okay.
Remember there were concerns.
Right, from that 2011 study.
Yes, about its effectiveness
Right.
and its safety.
Yeah.
And now some lawmakers are echoing those concerns.
Okay.
They're saying we can't just invest in a technology that hasn't been thoroughly vetted.
Right.
For example, Senator Brown,
Okay.
who represents a state that's been hit hard by wildfires,
Right.
he introduced an amendment to the bill
Okay.
requiring a comprehensive safety review
Okay.
before any funding is allocated.
So it's not just does it work,
Right.
but is it safe
Exactly.
for the environment?
For the environment.
And then, of course, there's the cost.
Yeah.
Is this really the best use of taxpayer dollars?
Right.
Or are there other, more effective approaches?
So this is about innovation.
Yes.
But it's also about being smart.
Right. Being prudent.
Yeah. And not just jumping into something that could be risky.
Or wasteful.
Or wasteful, yeah.
And that's where the congressional record,
Really helps us understand.
how these decisions are made.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about school counselors.
Okay.
Because I think this is such an important issue.
It is. It is.
We were talking about how they're so essential
Yes.
for kids' mental health,
Their well-being.
their well-being.
But they're so often stretched too thin,
They are.
under-resourced.
So is there anything in the works?
There is. There's a bill
Okay.
called the School Counselor Support Act,
Okay.
which would provide funding
For more counselors
for more counselors
and for training.
and for professional development to
Okay.
help them build their skills.
So what do you think? What are the chances of this passing?
Well, it's always hard to say.
Right.
but it does have bipartisan support.
Okay.
In fact, Representative Green, a Democrat, and a Representative White,
Okay.
Republican,
Okay.
they actually co-sponsored the bill.
Oh, wow.
And they gave a joint press conference
Oh.
really emphasizing how important this is.
It's good to see that there are still some things that can bring people together.
Exactly. You know, even in these very polarized times,
Yeah.
there's still issues that we can agree on.
Yeah, that gives me hope.
That's a good sign.
Okay. Last but not least,
Okay.
foreign aid.
Yeah.
We were talking about Tunisia
Right.
and the concerns about how that aid is being used.
Yes.
So are there any updates on that?
Well, there's a bill under consideration right now
Okay.
that would place conditions on future aid to Tunisia.
Okay.
So they would have to demonstrate progress
Okay.
on human rights
Okay.
and democratic reforms
Right.
before any funds are released.
So it's not just giving them money
No, it's about accountability.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that the aid is being used.
for the purposes that it was intended for.
Exactly. And the congressional record is really helpful for tracking this debate.
So I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
I have.
It's been a lot of information,
It has.
but it's been really insightful.
I think so.
And I think it's really important for people to understand,
To understand how our government works.
yeah, how the sausage gets made,
Yeah.
and I think the congressional record,
It's a great resource.
it is. It's a great resource for doing that.
It is. It's a living record of our democracy in action.
Yeah.
And it's available to all of us.
Yeah, you don't have to be a policy wonk
Right.
to understand it.
You can go online.
Yeah.
You can read the debates.
You can see what your representatives are saying.
Right. You can hold them accountable.
And you know what I think it's especially important in today's world?
Where we're bombarded with information from all sides.
Yeah, to go to the source.
To the primary source
Yeah.
to see what's actually happening.
So I think that's a good takeaway for our listeners.
Yes, go to the source.
Go to the source, read the congressional record,
Get informed.
get informed.
And stay engaged.
And that's how we make a difference. Yeah. All right, well, that's it for this deep dive into the congressional record.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us, everybody.
And we'll see you next time.